Hi, welcome everyone. We're going to just give a few minutes as everyone logs on. Hi, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, regarding where you're logging on from. Welcome to MassMEDIC and Triple Wings webinar, the intersection of diagnostic and therapeutic imaging and its resulting effect on patient care. My name is Nicole Owens, and I'm the Director of Marketing Communications at MassMEDIC. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are a membership-based trade association for the medical device industry, and we work to bolster the ecosystem in New England. With that, I'm going to turn the conversation over to our moderator for this conversation, Bill Dowd. Bill is the practice area lead for medical devices at Triple Ring. Take it away, Bill.
Thanks, Nicole. I very much appreciate the introduction, and we're very happy here at Triple Ring to help host this webinar. And we thank all the attendees for taking the time to join, and hopefully we'll have a spirited debate and discussion, and we can all come back out of the webinar with a lot of great new, fresh information. As by means of introduction of Triple Ring, in case you're unaware, Triple Ring is a co-development company, and we stand side by side with innovators and entrepreneurs to solve hard problems, launch breakthrough innovative products, and create new businesses. And again, it's our pleasure to be here. We've assembled a panel of experts in the area of the topic of the webinar, again, the intersection of diagnostic and therapeutic imaging and its resulting effect on patient care. I'm going to ask each of the panel attendees to introduce themselves and take just a moment or two to perhaps give a bit of background on their company and technology to set the stage for the discussion we're going to have. So with that, Ryan, would you mind starting?
Sure, thanks, Bill. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Dittamore. I'm the CEO of Cordance Medical, and we're developing a focused ultrasound device to open up the blood-brain barrier to improve liquid biopsies and drug delivery, primarily in neuro-oncology and neurology indications.
Thank you very much. Jameel, welcome.
Hi guys, Jameel Feshitan, co-founder and CEO at Advanced Microbubbles. My background is in biocolor, specifically ultrasound responsive biocolor is called Microbubbles, which we're trying to use to help solve fundamental challenges in cancer treatment, poor penetration caused by the blood-brain barrier, the tumor endothelium barrier. So what we're optimizing is this microbubbles to help improve the penetration of drugs right where you want them to go and minimize off-target toxicity to healthy tissue.
Thank you, Jameel. Howard, welcome.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to MassMEDIC for putting this on. My name is Howard Hechler. I'm the Chief Business and Strategy Officer here at Lumicell. We've developed a combination product, the Lumicell Direct Visualization System, to enable the detection and removal of residual cancer real time during surgery. It consists of an optical imaging agent, an intracavity scanning device, and tumor detection software that guides the surgeon on exactly where to cut. And we just completed our pivotal trial and are looking forward to a launch hopefully mid next year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Kristin, you're up next, last but not least.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Kristin Molina, and I'm with Philips, which is a leading player in the health tech space. I lead a business called Enterprise Care Collaboration, which provides informatics solutions for health systems, clinics, and insurers to connect patients and providers, enable patient engagement, as well as transitions of care. And before that, I led strategy and business development for our healthcare informatics portfolio, which includes the enterprise imaging solutions in radiology, cardiology, and oncology, our electronic health record and population health management solutions. Excited to be here. Thanks.
Excellent. Again, thank you to our panel for the time you're going to spend in today's session. Maybe a couple of rules of the road before we get started. The first of which is I've got a series of questions that I'll be asking. I'll address the start of each question to one of our panelists. And then we'll ask that as they complete their answer for that question, and we have a bit of an open forum until that question has been sufficiently addressed. And then I'll move to the next one. And then that way, all of us have a chance to participate in the conference. And for those of you that are attending the session today, I'm sure there'll be questions or perhaps requests for additional comment or information as you go. So what we'll do is, following the series of questions and roundtable debate, we'll save the last 15 minutes or so of today's webinar session, and we'll be able to then address each of those questions. So if you have some and you'd like to submit them, please use the chat function, the Q&A in the chat function, to ask your question. We'll compile them in the background and then make sure we address as many of them as we can before our session times out. So again, thank you all. Okay, so in terms of our first question for today, I'll be addressing this one to Howard. Howard, what are the main drivers of innovation in your area of expertise, which involve the intersection of imaging and therapeutics, which of course is the title of our session today?
Thanks, Bill. I guess there are a number of drivers, and I'll be absolutely curious to hear what the other members of the panel have to say. The first thing that jumps out at me is increased investor sentiment and interest. For those who have spent time in imaging, you look back 5 years, 10 years ago, it was often, the redheaded stepchild. And now suddenly there's a lot of investor dollars coming in there. I think it has a lot to do with a more personalized approach to medicine, a desire to find the right patients on the front end for trials, the right therapeutics to give them on the back end, change, targeted radiation, the variety of other things where it's increasingly recognized that imaging is the solution to that. The second point here is that, and it dovetails with this, is that there's an evolution to these treatment paradigms. And you see it every 5 to 10 years, right? There's a period before radiation where it was just cut, cut, cut. Then there was radiation and it was cook, cook, cook. And now increasingly we've backed off that because we've recognized there are subsets of patients like the elderly or of other comorbid conditions where we may not want to use radiation. And so at least, for Lumicell, for example, the ability to find cancer and remove it the first time, particularly in patient populations where perhaps you're planning on not using radiation, we have found to be a powerful part of the story. And then the final point I'll make is that, I think AI is increasingly another enabling factor. AI was in a very different place 10, 15 years ago. And as AI evolves, it further enables imaging. It further enables, it's a catalyst and, a growth factor for, I think, everything that we touch right now.
Yeah, Howard, if I could add to that, I think,
Please.
In glioblastoma and primary brain tumors, we're using AI now in a lot of the academic centers to better identify recurrence. So when a patient recurs, there's a question of if it's necrosis from the radiation or is it actually a tumor growth. And so there is quite a bit of investment in that. And so that's really important from a patient perspective of getting a quick diagnosis of recurrence so that we can start the next therapy. And last year we also, another example of clinical need, we saw this driven by pharma, which is the development of PSMA therapies, which one was approved today, this last couple of months. But we saw as the addition of a PSMA PET imaging, and that has restaged prostate cancer, metastatic prostate cancer, and high-risk prostate cancer, where we can now identify a patient as having an upstaging to a metastatic disease if they have this PSMA PET light up. And so it's better than the bone scans at doing that. And that's really made a big difference as you think about the pharma world in developing drugs, so that we now have a new definition of what a clinical stage is in advanced prostate cancer.
Hi, just to I think build on some of that, and Howard mentioned the personalized care as well. And where I'm really focused now is on how do you engage that patient? How do you empower these patients to really be educated and really take ownership over their own healthcare journeys? We've heard of the rise of consumerism in healthcare. And so we see better clinical outcomes when the patient has the tools at their hands to be able to make better informed decisions and have those discussions with their clinical care team. So I think that's also really important of that they're making those informed decisions and are actively participating in their diagnosis and treatment decisions.
And it's not just as individuals, we're seeing it in the patient advocacy groups as well, right? You've sort of got, on the one hand, if you look over a time span of 5 to 10 years, the hospital margins have gotten worse and worse. And so the dollar has gotten tighter and tighter. But at least when I look at it, I see a counterbalance in the power of patient advocacy groups, right? Breast is a perfect example where there's an increasing amount of power, at least I'd call it leverage and share of voice. And it's able to counteract that I think some of the fiscal concerns that can at times limit innovation. So that's another thing I agree. It's part of that personalization, but it's sort of crowdsourced personalization to more powerful groups, I think.
Oh, those are excellent comments. Jameel, do you want to jump in? Sorry.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to add, maybe, for my field, right, there's a lot of push in the direction of combining the approach of taking an agent that's used for imaging that can also be used as a therapeutic and sort of combining it in an image guided therapeutic approach. So it's the idea that you can, for instance, if for microbubble, which is used as an ultrasound diagnostic image, can also be used for treatment, then maybe you don't have to use an expensive instrumentation like MRI to guide the process, and that could be potentially used where MRI is not as widely available, some parts of the world, and ultrasound is portable and cheaper as a means of guiding therapies. So just something that could be, drive innovation and wider access of this type of technologies.
Excellent comments. I appreciate the debate so far. As we transition, let's say, to another question, what I was hearing is that we're seeing a large increase or uptick in the effects and the effort of patient advocacy as it relates to new technologies in this area. We're also seeing, I would say, almost record levels of investment with companies being funded, at higher levels and with different multiples than I think we've seen in the past. If we say, okay, those are the drivers into the marketplace, maybe if we look at it from the other direction, 180 degrees, address this to Kristin to start. Kristin, what do you see as the obstacles, and by that maybe clinical, regulatory, as they play into our discussion, that must be addressed to have the patients really see or benefit from these clinical developments and opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So as I mentioned with the consumerism of healthcare, that patients are expecting to have that Amazon type experience, and they're looking for the convenience, the ease of use, timely communication, between their care providers. But the reality is, healthcare is a regulated world. So any communication, we have HIPAA and other, the FDA or EU MDR, depending on the location. But working with health systems that are now very much viewing their patient population as consumers and are more and more talking about patients as a consumer way. I think one element that we've seen, especially with the pandemic, is the rise of remote patient monitoring and telehealth and virtual care options. But it's one thing when you're monitoring a patient within the four walls of a hospital and you can control those parameters. But when you set those patients up outside, there's so many other variables that cannot be controlled. So really how to solve for some of those challenges, what's reliable, what's not, what use cases, what patient populations, what type of monitoring or digital solutions are appropriate for which patients. Is really important to work through and navigate so that you can improve those clinical outcomes, but that you're always putting the patient safety as first and foremost. But with that, we very successfully have seen our customers reduce the number of in-person visits, for example, for kidney transplant patients that require 1-2 years of follow-up. They're able to use remote virtual care options, monitor those patients, and in this case, it's an academic medical center that is drawing patients from a very wide geographic region. So to be able to reduce the number of times that those patients need to come in, travel a long distance, and sit in the waiting room and do the follow-up has a tremendous impact on patient experience, and in turn on the staff satisfaction levels and the overall patient retention within their health system. So it's really about creating that win-win, but nevertheless adjusting these clinical and regulatory. It all needs to be done in the context of ensuring patient safety and delivering those clinical outcomes. Howard, I think I saw that maybe you raised your hand. If you'd like to build on that.
Well, I think I unmute by accident because my finger twitched, but sure. I was gonna sort of add to that and say, in the same way that I brought up, AI previously, and digital health, it as much as it's a blessing, it's also a curse, right? Because the FDA is still figuring out what it means. Same thing we'll get to when we talk about reimbursement. As we think of our AI at Lumicell and the extent to which it guides the surgeon and helps them accomplish what they need. There were a lot more discussions with the FDA on how to craft those trials. And even as we think about interacting with the payers. So again, I think, anytime you talk about new opportunities, that adds, that brings to light also as the opposite of new opportunities are areas that aren't settled yet. And there are times when you're dealing with regulators and payers and others that you would rather have defined answers. And so I think we're still learning in that regard. But again, on the positive side, the FDA, CMS, and others are so incredibly engaged, working so hard, and so excited about these new imaging technologies and what they can do to the standard of care that we found our interaction with them to be really quite positive and constructive.
Ryan or Jameel, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'll just add that, I'm always very focused on the clinical trial and the strategy to get through the FDA process and demonstrate clinical benefit to the patient. And sometimes we have indications where the predicate device that you're compared to is not as good as the device you're putting on board. So then the question is how do you prove it's better? And designing the studies in the right way, and to Howard's point, aligning with the FDA is really important, that there is a consensus across the teams to figure out what is the right way to design the trial and execute the trial. But so unfortunately, these trials can be very difficult to run because they require real objective endpoints to be measured. And that could involve other interventions, and that could take time to recruit patients and be costly.
Yeah, just to jump on that, there might be certain outcomes that you've been able to prove in a preclinical space that you think could be really beneficial, but maybe the FDA may not necessarily allow for such trials, right? So it's like being able to decide, what is the most important thing want approved in terms of taking the technology into the clinics. And even though you may have certain ambitions for how far you want to push the technology, you have to be sort of realistic because FDA is looking out for patient safety, right? Maybe start out with this first, show this proof of concept before you can think about trying this other more pie in the sky approach. So it's just the FDA, they are going to look out for the patients first and foremost. So it's just important that being able to navigate this the first phase 1 clinical trials to show that the technology, if you have introduced something new like ours is, trying to use it in a new and unique way, you want to be able to try to show that your technology is safe first, and then convince the FDA to allow you to take more chances on the more potentially advantageous uses of the technology. So and we've had some really good discussions with the FDA about different strategies, and they've been very helpful so far.
Excellent. Thank you, Jameel. Again, we heard some interesting pieces of data. The first of which, in kind of relationship to clinical studies or regulatory obstacles, the idea that telehealth has become so prevalent now. And I think post-pandemic, it's something that really loosened up in a factor or in a speed that nobody could have anticipated before that. And I think it opened up both new opportunities and new challenges for the regulatory agencies, the companies that are producing and inventing technology to figure out how all that plugs together in this regulated world. So Kristin, if you don't mind, I'm going to come back to you for a second question on this, because you brought up the idea of the regulated world. But the other part of, say, agencies that either regulate or in some way affect the industry, reimbursement is a key part of it. And I think that when we look at how companies are able to plan out what type of payments might be available for a very innovative, groundbreaking technology, it's difficult at times. So I guess I'm interested to hear, what do you think are the critical success factors, reimbursement or otherwise, that are being addressed by companies big and small as you're looking to bring innovative technology to the market?
Right. So I think, and that was actually something that we saw in the pandemic that with telehealth that supported was they kind of removed some of the barriers. They've reimbursed at the same rates, and kind of allowed the cross-state borders for doctors to be able to service. So to, in some cases temporarily, but now looking for how do we start to really take this out of that urgent crisis pandemic mode into a more sustainable way. And when we talk to our customers, they're now looking at how can they use virtual care technologies to scale and to be able to serve more patients and in a more effective way, using a hybrid model. You can't replace in-person care 100%, but like the example I gave, you can find a more, just as effectively or more effectively treat patients in a way that also helps your health system to scale. You don't have to build more physical buildings or have more staff on board or create more staff, staff hours in that concept. I think some other, critical success factors are, interoperability. But again, if you're talking about a specific device or a digital solution or a therapeutic solution, what are the important elements to be successful, and then to have the ROI. So if the end is, if it's, you need to be, reimbursed procedure or treatment, then, what is your stakeholder ecosystem look like? What do you need to be successful and have those proof points? If you're trying to drive operational efficiencies, or have better clinical outcomes, you need to be able to have those proof points to go to your customers to show that there is an ROI, whether it's going to be cost savings, increased revenue. Your staff will have reduced hours doing one element because they're going to be able to do something else by using the solution. So I think that those are some of the important elements to be able to be successful, that are big challenges still to solve in many cases.
Ryan and I have talked before about the importance of doing reimbursement work early. I mean, seriously, if anyone's logged in and listening, you can't start early enough. You really can't. For some reason, reimbursement tends to be the thing everyone pushes towards the end. They think it's about commercialization, and so they worry about it when they get close, and by then it is far too late. You need to be thinking about it now, no matter how early you are. You need to be putting the time and the work and the resources in. And by the way, it will make a huge difference as you talk with investors. It will make a huge difference as you talk with strategics. As we talk with investors and strategics right now for a fairly large round, I'd say either the first question or the second question, sometimes even before what's your pivotal data, is what's your reimbursement path. And the fact that we've done work over the past few years, that we have the right partners we're working with, that we've done the analysis, the interviews, all the things that go into being able to say that we understand what our pathway is and we feel confident, has made a huge difference. And I would say, particularly with imaging, which again, in that world of diagnostics, there was an element of imaging and payment that was often commoditized. And so particularly as you think that intersection between imaging then and therapeutics, the ability to understand where you fall, whether you're going to be reimbursed as a device, or for example, for us, because we have an optical imaging agent, we get reimbursed as a drug. There's incredible value to really understanding this, understanding how you might parallel path and how you can create the most value for potential investors and strategics. So, again, if you take one thing away from this, if you're not already started working on reimbursement, do so. You'll be happy. You'll thank us for it later.
Completely agree, Howard. And I think when you parse that down even further, it becomes, who are the reimbursement stakeholders, right? So in your demographic population, maybe half of them, a lot in cancer care, about half of the patients are under Medicare, and their charge is reasonable and necessary, which is different than the safe and efficacious of FDA. But the commercial payers, which represent the other half, have very different charges and with their own groups. And so they'll be looking for guidelines. They'll want to make sure that the medical guidelines have adopted and have recommended your device. Then they'll also want to see that there's some sort of health economic benefit for the patients. And they tend to lag Medicare in these settings. So it's really important to bring up front, just as Howard had said, to think about when you're developing your evidence, your clinical evidence, what is the evidence required to prove safe and efficacious for the FDA? But at the same time, what are the studies you're going to do specifically for both CMS and commercial payers? Because oftentimes they can be very different. And we've had experience in my career working on different studies for commercial payers than even Medicare. And so, a lot of it's evidence generation that you're going to have to invest in, and making sure that you're investing enough and have the plan to address those and be, straightforward with your investors on the amount of investment you need to run those trials.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the input. I'll change over to Jameel for this next question. Jameel, we've been hearing about a lot of different things that are external to companies such as yours, whether it's reimbursement, regulatory environment, whether it's a huge amount of investment coming into the area. But besides, for example, with investment, besides the resources, the cash, the infusion to get you from A to B, what do you need? What does your company need to help you achieve your goals as a business?
It's an excellent question, Bill. So now in our early stage, and even though we have really nice preclinical data, one of the things that keep me awake is the unknowns when you go through a process of taking a technology like as ours, which has been conventionally used for one application, and we're not trying to use it for a completely different application, switching from imaging to drug delivery. It's very helpful to have a sort of a strategic or partner, an investor who understands the potential challenges and pitfalls that you're about to face in taking or who has experience taking a similar type of product like ours and going through all those phases from the preclinical to the clinical phase. Where are the pitfalls in the phase 1 and phase 2 trial? Do you pick the right indication, or you pick the wrong indication that sort of messes up the entire strategy or pathway your company was looking at? So it's good to have the right kind of investor or the right kind of support mechanism that has the experience going through that process and dealing with the regulatory hurdles. And one of the things we have to think about is, we're most likely going to be a combination of products, because we're taking bubbles is acting like a device, combining it with a drug, and then you have to deal with two arms of the FDA, so CDRH and CDR. And then, being able to navigate that process, navigate a successful clinical trial and clinical trial outcomes, and then also being able to bring in strategics. For instance, if in our company we're trying to show with potential pharma partners, right? We can take your drugs, the library of drugs that have failed in the past, because of chemotoxicity or because they can't penetrate a barrier. And with our technology, we can pairing with our platform, we can make those field classes now become more relevant. Then the question is, how do we foster a partnership with such strategic, such as we can work out something together where we bring it to the clinics to help improve outcomes in cancer. So it's just having just because of long story short, just to have a right kind of partner and investor that can sort of guide us through this process, hiring the right kind of talent and advise us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I open this up for the other panelists to jump in as well.
Yeah, I'll just maybe add to the aspect that what we're all trying to do is remarkably difficult, especially in some of these diseases. And so the team that you build, not only internally, but externally, is really important. And so investors play a key part of that in terms of networking to different strategic partners, but the physician teams that you have are really important. Regulatory advisors, reimbursement advisors. I always say that I can't have a big enough network, and it's really important to have an investor group that is really behind the company, thinking a lot about the company, and helping the company to find the right partners to help develop the product in the right way.
Hi, and I just wanted to add maybe a couple thoughts, having spent better part of my career actually on the M&A side of first with GE and now Philips. So I've looked at a lot of these companies. So if the ultimate goal is an exit and selling to a larger strategic, I think what was talked about on the reimbursement or a clear path to a proven business model is going to be really important. That with early customers that have kind of worked out some of the kinks and learned from that, and then have a proven scalable business model in play. So if it's something that falls within the reimbursement, that there's clarity on how that will factor in as well. I think talked about the team and both kind of the internal and the team of experts that have been built. And then I think ultimately kind of how does this fit in with the customers, in with their workflow? How are they going to adopt it? It's not just about a piece of technology, but how is this really going to fit into their current ways of working and practices of care? And have those elements been really kind of thought through, if there's going to be changes in how they're delivering care, and then how will that adoption be built out? Has that been kind of well understood or thought through?
Excellent. Jameel, do you have a comment? I saw you went unmuted. Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't speak over you. Okay, great. As another approach to that, or another way of looking at it, we've talked a lot about the regulatory side, the reimbursement side. We briefly touched on commercialization. I'd like to maybe go a little bit into that here with some time remaining. Commercialization of this technology is the ultimate goal of the high-tech companies represented on this panel, as well as those in the audience. Based on Ryan, your background, what types of pitfalls exist out there for companies inventing novel technologies that we haven't spoken about yet?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge challenge to commercialize well and to develop a marketplace, especially as an innovative product. A lot of times the technology is developed by an engineer because they've come up with some discovery, a novel intellectual property, and you try to develop it into a market need. And that's unfortunately the wrong way to go. You have to start with the market need. And when we think about the market need, the next pitfall is as you start to do your clinical development, you're interacting with physicians at tertiary academic centers. And what happens at those tertiary centers is very different than what actually happens at the community practice. And, in cancer care, about 85% of patients are treated in the community. And so that's the marketplace. And understanding that these are small businesses, that, they have different incentives, physician incentives, different time constraints put on them comparative to an academic. And so understanding your market well, also recognizing that, I've seen it many times where if you tried to disrupt the way these physicians practice, your technology may not be adopted. I like to say there's no inertia greater than the standard operating procedure of a physician. They're creatures of habit, and so you need to understand them deeply to know, how does your device improve their life? How does it improve their staff's lives? How does it make their patients' lives better? It's not just one aspect of it. It's the whole environment, from ordering the product, to getting it serviced. There's a whole ecosystem about really satisfying the need of the community physician. And that's where I often see companies, maybe they have great data, but they cannot translate that over to commercial success. And so you have to start with that very early on, and then design your clinical trials, as we discussed, around reimbursement, about FDA approval, all the aspects of that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the interaction between the patient, the nurse, the physician is really what's going to be the winning key to the product.
To add on to that, everything Ryan said, and in addition, you have to pressure test it over time, right? There's that factor of time. We're in companies that will take more than a year to get a product to market, particularly if you think about changing imaging modalities, then the intersection with therapeutics. These are not things that will be in the market 12 months after an engineer designs it. So you have to be willing to constantly pressure test to make those small pivots, those small iterative pivots, so that you don't find yourself much farther down the road and now it's a 180-degree turn. And those are the companies that succeed, that are constantly reevaluating and saying, am I meeting my unmet need? Am I meeting what the payers want? Am I meeting what the FDA wants? And checking in with those stakeholders, not just saying, well, I think it's still the same, because ultimately what I think, what Jameel thinks, what Kristin thinks, what Ryan thinks, none of it really matters. It's what the market thinks. And so if you're not talking to the market, you just create an echo chamber. And they're warm, fuzzy places to be right up until the moment the bubble pops, and then not so much. Again, completely agree with everything Ryan said, but just keep in mind that idea of all of this evolving over time, and that we are in companies that will be around for 3, 5, 10, 15 years. And we should never rest on just one snapshot of anything.
Great points.
Right, and I again agree on kind of the inertia, and that it's how does it fit into my existing workflow. But right now we know the number one challenge facing the healthcare system is the staffing shortages and burnout, and so I think even now more than ever it is really critical in understanding, how do you get that adoption? What is that going to mean? So like Ryan was talking about, that's really kind of the more the mindset and some of the influence of what you're bringing to the table, and then how are you going to make the life better, easier, faster, whatever it is, for the clinicians, for the nurses, for the patients, is really critical.
Yeah, I mean, I found it, just piggybacking on the points that the panelists have said, I found it very helpful, speaking to the end users or potential end users of our products, and just trying to gauge their feedback on how they would want to be able to use a technology like ours in this new application. So being able to leverage the already existing ecosystem for how, for instance, bubble ultrasound contrast agents to use. So not having to create this whole completely disruptive training process. If you can take what they already know and just mix, and you're not overly changing too many things for them at a time, it's very helpful, right? So if the same training on how to inject the product, how to treat the patient, if your technology can be synergistic with what is already existing, that can be very helpful in easing that transition. Yeah.
That's great, Jameel. Thank you for the comment. In terms of our time, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I'd like to maybe ask a general question that each of the panelists could answer. I've kind of absorbed this question as we've been talking, so it's not something that we've pre-prepared. But what I would like to know is, and we've talked about a lot of things that have happened over the past years that are happening today in this space. But where would you describe that this intersection of therapeutic and diagnostic imaging is going to be 10 or 20 years from now? I mean, to me, there's no wrong, right answer here. But just from your perspective, from the company that you're representing and your personal, let's say, experience, what are we going to be looking at? Is it going to be a Star Trek world of, lay that on the table and we can diagnose and treat everything within 30 seconds? Are we going to have to really focus on training and educating patients and clinicians and technicians on how to use the equipment once technology takes another leap forward? Again, just general interest in the last 5 minutes, maybe have a little round table on that. So Ryan, do you want to get started?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. So, we're developing a product, and I think, Howard has the same aspect of this as well, too, which is that the imaging is a component of the therapy opportunity. And so bringing care together is really going to be the aspect of this where we can actually, interact with the device. So our device will use diagnostic ultrasound to guide the ability to open up the blood-brain barrier exactly where the physician wants to do that. So it's an integration of systems. And I'd like to think that, over the next years, we'll see more and more of that where imaging will interact with the therapy.
I can definitely champion Brian's device, and it's sort of predicts of the future of what's I envision of the potential of a technology where you have a completely non-invasive way to treat a patient. So whether you're trying to perform surgery, or in our case, we're trying to drug delivery, having surgery without a knife, right? You're not cutting through healthy tissue to treat disease tissue. Or in the case of drug delivery, being able to concentrate the drug right where you want it without causing terrible side effects to the patient. So being able to eliminate chemotoxicity, and I think that's kind of hopefully where I see the future going with this technology.
I think it'll largely mirror where you see molecular diagnostics has gone, right? Where you started off with a whole lot of molecular diagnostic tests that frankly didn't have clinical benefit. It was just more information. And that was okay initially because doctors wanted more information, patients, everyone wanted more information, but ultimately then the other side were the fiscal concerns and the constraints. And so over time, those molecular diagnostics, the ones that won, are the ones that have been tied to, coupled with a clinical benefit, right? A treatment. And I think you'll see the same thing with imaging, to Ryan's point, that the ones that will win are the ones that are part of a more comprehensive therapeutic approach. The ones that, because particularly as hospitals are only going to have tighter margins, reimbursements are going to get more challenging. And over time, it's only if you can take your imaging modality and tie it to something that is directly going to benefit the patient rather than just more information, that you're going to win. So I think you're going to see a lot of these. I think you'll see it for imaging and for the enabling AI and even for digital health, right? There's lots of stuff out there, and that's super exciting, and everyone's throwing money at it. But fast forward 5-10 years, you're going to start seeing the consolidation then, as it really drives towards the most important so what's.
Right. I guess if I did look into my crystal ball, I think as we are more and more of our health data is becoming digitalized, and we have not only imaging data, but we have genomic data, we have digital pathology data, and then behavioral insights into who we are as a person. How do we take all of these data elements and not just make that a whole bunch of noise, but really drive those insights to really enable the future ambition is personalized medicine that achieves value-based care, and not treating everyone as somewhat of based on some best case that's for the population at whole, but we actually deliver the best population care because it is personalized. But that is really going to mean taking all of these data elements, applying AI and other advanced technologies so that it's not an overload of information, but that we do get that right, insightful information to enable personalized care.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristin. Any other comments on the future of where we're going? All right, excellent. Well, I must admit, I've really enjoyed this last 45 minutes with the panel, and I just want to take a moment before we look to transition to the question and answer period to first thank the panel members for their time, the preparation that they put into this session, and to the free kind of open exchange of information during our call today. So thank you very, very, very much. Secondarily to that, I just wanted to encourage our audience members to please submit your questions. We have some, I think we'll have time to get to a couple more, but if you'd like to submit those, please do so with the chat function, and we'll make sure that we cover them again, time permitting, here at the end. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to our host from MassMEDIC to facilitate the question and answer.
All right, great conversation, everybody. I think, Tracy, you actually wanted to take the first question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at Triple Ring. So we got one question from the audience, and I would like to ask the panelists. So this question is from Mary Ann Hino. She's the CEO of Lantheus. Lantheus, they launched a new AI technologies. It's called Pylarify, which is the artificial intelligence enabled software program that can read the images, and also it's already FDA clear. So her question is, a key additional considerations is how will the application of the diagnostic change patient management? So is anyone want to take this question?
I can start. I'm not familiar with this particular program, but I think I would go back to some of the points that I think I and my other panelists made about how does this really fit into the stakeholder ecosystem. What are you dependent on, the oncologist or the other primary care doctors that are the care team that's taking care of this patient? How are they going to use? How is the Pylarify solution going to be prescribed? What's the education around that? Do you need to go into the health systems and then inform those oncologists to, or the urologists to prescribe and use this particular AI reading program? So I think if you really map the entire journey of where do you fit in, and then, you know, how is the workflow going to change from what is happening today to how is the care team going to use your solution? And then who do you need to kind of work with and inform in order to be successful, so that the better outcomes are kind of proven with the solution?
That's a good point. There, you know, it's an entire team that treats instances of cancer, but they're very different stakeholders and they have very different interests. And so, you know, sometimes it's the pathologist, sometimes it's the surgeon, sometimes it's the medical oncologist, sometimes radiation oncologist. And so, you know, you don't just have to know it's not just about a commercial sales call and who is your initial, you know, call. It's about who are all the decision makers, and some of them are going to be ones where they will actively champion, other ones who could simply stand in the way if they feel threatened, rather than seeing this as an opportunity to give better care. So a lot of it has to do with, you know, that messaging, because they're all very engaged. I've never seen a group of in oncology, you find teams that work so incredibly well together and are so dedicated to the health of the patient. And so that can be a great thing, because you have an opportunity to interact with and engage with you know, an entire group. But that also means you have to interact and engage with an entire group. And you know, if you're not playing to patient management, you'll get crushed by it. It'll roll right over you. So I think it's a great question, Mary. And if you're not thinking about it, it will seriously limit your ability to drive new imaging modalities.
Yeah, I'd like to add that the specialization in the tertiary centers is getting almost ridiculous. The understanding of these diseases and the subspecialties. Now if you have breast cancer, there's different specialties of breast cancer from a physician perspective, and they'll actually refer you to back and forth. And so a community physician can be overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge to know in a particular disease. And if you take urology an example, they go from kidney stones to prostate cancer to bladder cancer, and there's just a tremendous wealth of knowledge. So we have an opportunity to create solutions that are trained by some of the best physicians out there and some of the best practices out there in that specialization, and democratize that to the community center. And I think that's really the key focus of a lot of the imaging solutions that are coming out is how do we democratize care?
Thanks, everyone. Since we only have 10 minutes left, there's no more questions from the audience. So I would like to ask a general question to the panelists. It's an open question. So there might be a lot of entrepreneurs, incubators, and new business want to enter the world. So what would be your general suggestions for people who want to enter the imaging world, develop a new technology? Just your general, it can be AI, digital health. What would be your general suggestions for people to enter this world?
That's probably about an hour answer because there's so many different things to think about. But I'll just list a few of the high level things is again, we've stressed on the market need and coming up with a business strategy that addresses how do you eventually commercialize at the end of the day, get through the FDA and reimbursement. But there's also a reality of the investor sentiment in terms of there are technologies and spaces that are in vogue. And so, thinking very hard before you start about, how do you position the company? What does it mean to the investors? What are they looking for? And do you have an operational plan that scales at the appropriate times and is conservative at the appropriate times? Because, the reality is if you can't raise capital, you're never going to see that product get to the end of the day. So it's a combination of really, looking at 360 around the product solution and all the stakeholders that you have.
I think something we actually haven't mentioned previously, but again, it syncs with a lot of what you're saying, Ryan, is if you're at that very early stage, it's also about who you partner with during the development. So, which is to say, man, it's so important who that first KOL is, right? Who that first surgeon is, that first site, because we've got Barbara Smith is our lead PI. She's a leader in the breast cancer world, and she's been with us. God, I think 13 years or something, and she's been there through ups, through downs, guiding us, giving us information, making those introductions to other surgeons, and so picking the right sort of partners in that regard, those clinical supporters, is a make or break decision, and it's one that if you get it right in the beginning, it impacts everything else you do, and if you get it wrong, it won't end well.
I guess I would ask, so I am not an entrepreneur, so I have worked in large companies, but I do think I have led a venture, an internal corporate venture, but as part of the umbrella here. But something that I found a couple of years ago that I find incredibly helpful that fits whether it's a product strategy, a business unit, a new initiative. It's actually from Salesforce. When they started the company, it's a framework called V2 Mom. So V stands for what's your vision? The second V is what are your values? Then you have M for your measures. How are you going to do that? The O is your obstacles, and then M is your metrics. And you can Google it and it kind of walks you through that. But for me, that's always a very nice framework because if you can walk through, it gives you that strategic plan, and you can make it, as short or as long as you'd like to, but those are really the critical elements that when you're walking through and building your strategic plan. So that's a tool that I have found really helpful over the last couple of years that I highly recommend.
And as a sort of a first-time entrepreneur, I think one of the things that's been stressed to me is having the right team. If you're going into a venture, it's good to surround yourselves with the right team of co-founders and advisors that can really help, watch your back and make sure you're making the right steps and not taking the wrong steps. So it's very important to have the right team when you're setting out a new venture.
What you can extend what Kristin said and what Jameel said, in that whether you use V2 Mom or you use some of the other frameworks that are out there, have a framework. Have a guide point that you come back to at various points and check in. Am I staying true to what I said? And if I didn't, why am I changing? And that's going to guide you through a lot of those challenging moments. And so, which framework is better? I don't know. I'll look into V2 Mom. It sounds interesting, but what's most important is have a framework, right? When you talk with potential clinicians, when you talk with investors, when you talk internally to people in your company, it defines you. It's the glue that holds you together to a certain point. And it's the lack of a framework that, Kristin, I did a lot of the same stuff when I was at Medtronic, and you could instantly tell who had the framework versus didn't, right? Those companies that would come in and they would just be scattered and haphazard, and it permeated everything they had done previously and that they were going to do. And the ones who had a framework, those were the ones where you could trust what came before and trust what was going to come.
Maybe one just concluding thought on that is I've always found in my career that, the true north of the organization, you start going in different directions, and is patient care. And if you put the patient outcomes at the center of what you do, and that's the true north of your organization,
Great point.
You won't go wrong. And we just have to be resilient through the obstacles that we have. But if you're making a difference in a patient's life in the United States, you'll get rewarded for that.
Great point.
Do you have something to add?
So Jill, again, I'd like to thank the panel for their help today. Just a couple of concluding comments. We thank all of the attendees here that listened to our webinar today. We hope you were able to internalize and take home some valuable pieces of information. Again, my name is Bill Dowd. I'm with Triple Ring Technologies. Our tagline is that we resource innovation. So these types of sessions are very important to us, and to provide the resources to entrepreneurs, small companies, and others is absolutely our pleasure and our desire to do that. And we do it through our offices in the Bay Area in California, the south end of Boston, Toronto, and a small new office in Copenhagen. So our team of over 130 scientists and engineers are available to help in any way we can, whether it's to these panelists here on the session, to any of the people that have listened from their offices and at home, and anyone else that might see us on the recordings. So again, thank you all very much for your time today. I wish you a good day. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone at MassMEDIC. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Everyone who registered for this session today will receive a recording after the program. And thank you again to Triple Ring for sponsoring this, and to the panelists for joining us today. It's truly an honor to bring you this programming, and we can't do it without our sponsors. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.